royal special on the death of the Queen. Coming up in the next hour. The King's speech. King Charles expresses his gratitude to the nation and to his mother in this, his first public address as monarch.
To my darling Mamma, as you begin your last great journey to join my dear late Papa, I want simply to say this: thank you.
The King also confirms that William and Kate will become Prince and Princess of Wales, and he expresses his love for Harry and Meghan. His speech came at the start of a special remembrance service at St. Paul's Cathedral. The new King and the new Prime Minister this evening met for the first time since they each assumed their responsibilities. Earlier, gun salutes were fired at military sites across Britain. 96 rounds fired, one for each year of the Queen's life. Leaders from across the world joined together to pay tribute to the late monarch.
To you, she was your queen. To us, she was the queen.
Good evening and welcome to this Sky News Royal Special on the death of the Queen. Here, as the night falls at Buckingham Palace, crowds of people have continued to throng to pay their respects to the late monarch. Today, the first opportunity to greet their new king. King Charles arrived here this afternoon, mingling with his subjects, receiving their good wishes. This evening, the monarch made his first address to the nation. He offered his gratitude to everyone for the condolences they have offered, and to his mother for her life of service. He also began to sketch out the future of the royal family, with William and Kate confirmed as the new Prince and Princess of Wales. In the next hour, we'll be taking a pause to reflect on the momentous events of the past 24 hours, and we'll look forward to what it means for the future of the royal family and for our identity as a nation. But first, our home editor, Jason Farrell, reports on the new king.
It is a moment of great change, and for one man more than any. Charles arriving in the capital for the first time as king. As his mother knew, there is little time for private grief in this role. There were hands to shake and those unexpected moments to deal with, while songs to his health are sung.
Lord save our gracious King, Lord save our King, Lord save.
And though he has the comfort of a nation sharing in his loss, he has a job to do. And it begins now, here at Buckingham Palace, with this promise.
As the Queen herself did with such unswerving devotion, I too now solemnly pledge myself, throughout the remaining time God grants me, to uphold the constitutional principles at the heart of our nation. And wherever you may live in the United Kingdom, or in the realms and territories across the world, and whatever may be your background or beliefs, I shall endeavor to serve you with loyalty, respect, and love, as I have throughout my life.
The new king has the toughest of acts to follow. At his mother's bed yesterday, he left Balmoral this morning, flying to London with the Queen Consort.
Your Majesty, Prime Minister.
His first audience with a Prime Minister was in the week his mother appointed her. He knew this day was coming, but as he told Liz Truss, that didn't make it any easier.
But it's been so touching. This afternoon when we arrived here, all those people would come to give their condolences.
Your Majesty, my very, very sincere condolences.
You're very kind. It's a moment I've been dreading, as I know a lot of people have. But try and keep everything going.
Absolutely.
On behalf of all my family, I can only offer the most sincere and heartfelt thanks for your condolences and support. They mean more to me than I can ever possibly express. And to my darling Mama, as you begin your last great journey to join my dear late Papa, I want simply to say this: thank you. Thank you for your love and devotion to our family and to the family of nations you have served so diligently all these years. May flights of angels sing thee to thy rest.
It was at his father's funeral the family was last together, and like many monarchs before him, Charles's first thought was to prepare ground for the man who will come next, Prince William.
I am proud to create him Prince of Wales, Tywysog Cymru, the country whose title I've been so greatly privileged to bear during so much of my life and duty. With Catherine beside him, our new Prince and Princess of Wales will, I know, continue to inspire and lead our national conversations, helping to bring the marginal to the centre ground, where vital help can be given. I want also to express my love for Harry and Meghan as they continue to build their lives overseas.
So conciliation to Harry, who was last to arrive in Balmoral last night and first to leave this morning. His company to the gangway, an airport worker, as he boarded a British Airways flight. Though he has left the royal fold, the King seems to have given his blessing.
Her Majesty prays that the blessing of Almighty God may rest upon your counsels.
Just as the Queen gave him hers, handing over responsibilities such as opening Parliament on her behalf, showing us that she believed in him and we should too. He may not be as iconically famous as his mother, but actually we know him better, his strengths, his failings, and his opinions on things like climate change.
It's been a wonderful living.
His interventions have at times been controversial, seen as too political, a criticism he's addressed, saying around his 70th birthday he would not be a meddling monarch. But as he takes on the role, some hope he won't keep his opinions to himself.
King Charles has been an extraordinary voice, way ahead of his time, for 50 years, talking about nature-based solution, talking about deforestation and its challenges. So I hope King Charles will be able to continue to exert the moral authority he has thus far to help us win the battle of this crisis.
As his mother showed, there's a balance between understanding the nation and telling them what you think. And the success of a monarch is only measured by how people respond to you in that role. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Sky's royal commentator Alastair Bruce joins me now. Alastair, I guess that we are probably through phase one of the aftermath of the Queen's death now. New King has spoken. I think we're getting used to the phrase King Charles. Sketch out for us what happens over the next 2 to 3 days.
Well, the moment of change between one monarch and the next happened in the heartbeat and the death of the Queen. But there now needs to be a constitutional process of just reorganising all the procedures. And the most key of that comes tomorrow with the Accession Council. It's based in history, but its purpose is to put formality to the change of reign. And it is then communicated in this document that will be read out and signed to different places around the United Kingdom. And it's a reminder that they didn't all have television in the old days, and there was the need to communicate the change of monarch to the people, and that's the purpose of it. But it also creates another tick in the process of formally changing from the Queen to the King.
Do we yet have any knowledge of when the funeral will take place?
No, none at all, but we're hoping to get much more information on that and the manner in which the King would like the days in between to be managed, and exactly how the Queen will be recovered from Balmoral and brought ultimately down to this part of the world and finally to be buried. So all that just needs to be confirmed. We know roughly what is intended, but we don't know the formal way in which it's to be done. And we will wait until we're told, and then we can see. We know what needs to be done, but we just don't know the timings. And tomorrow, I think it should become clear.
The Queen herself, as we understand it, will spend at least some time still in Scotland, probably in Edinburgh, before being brought to London, where she'll rest in state.
What we know is that at the moment she's at Balmoral and with her family, and it is a quiet time for the family to come to terms with it, like so many other families choose to do in their own quiet way. And it's actually very cathartic, I think, because when the family release the Queen and her remains into the process that will lead to her funeral, in a way, she leaves them, because she becomes the possession of that greater family to which she committed her whole life. And that is the people who wish to witness and take part in the process of the funerary events that lead to her final burial.
So at that point, the population as a whole gets involved.
Television,
people,
all of us
television,
watching it and seeing how it all
presumably
progresses.
people will be able to visit her lying in state and so forth.
Well, all of that will be made clear, but it's the King's choice now. Right. And he will have been briefed. The Earl Marshal, who is the Duke of Norfolk, is responsible for putting together all the ceremonial. There'll be Parliament. We'll need to make sure that if she is to lie in state, everything is ready, and all that will be announced as soon as they're ready.
It's an extraordinary logistical exercise, and you mentioned the Duke of Norfolk. I mean, this is a sort of hereditary task. I think he's the 18th, isn't he? And all his ancestors have all been responsible for this kind of thing.
Nearly all of them, yes. And it is hereditary, but it draws upon many other full-time deliverers of huge capability, not least from the Lord Chamberlain's office in Buckingham Palace, from the armed forces, from other organisations, the different devolved organisations, and also the United Kingdom government. So all of it is contributing to make sure that our previous head of state is properly carried to her grave.
And the King himself, what can we expect to see him doing between the period between now and the funeral? There was some talk that he would be going to different parts of the United Kingdom during that period.
We believe that's the intent, that the King will get to meet his kingdom. And the four constituent parts are known to us well: Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales and England. And to find ways in which he can formally arrive in those different parts and to launch this new reign. After, the Queen's reign was so long that when you have this punctuation point of change, it is important to mark it and set it off in the right direction. I think that the King's statement today absolutely did that.
Alastair, thank you for the moment. The Prime Minister and her predecessors paid tribute to the Queen today as parliamentarians came together to mourn. Liz Truss, Boris Johnson and Theresa May all spoke in the Commons, sharing personal anecdotes from their encounters with Her Majesty. The Prime Minister described the Queen as one of the greatest leaders the world has ever known. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer said that the loss of our Queen robs this country of its stillest point, its greatest comfort, at precisely the time we need those things most. Our next report comes from our political editor, Beth Rigby, as Westminster pays tribute.
Queen Elizabeth II, a constitutional constant who saw 14 prime ministers come and go. from Churchill to Cameron, Macmillan to May, Thatcher to Truss, anointing her 15th PM just 2 days before she died, devotion to duty to the very end. A procession into Parliament to lead hours of tributes, MPs gathered to mark the passing of a monarch mourned by millions, deeply missed in this place, the mother of all parliaments. The new Prime Minister leading the tributes.
Speaker, I have personally greatly valued her wise advice. It was just 3 days ago at Balmoral that she invited me to form a government and become her 15th Prime Minister. Again, she generously shared with me her deep experience of government, even in those last days.
MPs sharing personal and professional accounts of the Queen, who touched not just their lives, but the life of nations around the world.
Queen Elizabeth created a special personal relationship with us all. That relationship was built on the attributes that defined her reign: her total commitment to service and duty, her deep devotion to the country, the Commonwealth, and the people she loved.
This former Prime Minister pained.
She helped to comfort and guide us, as well as the nation, because she had the patience and the sense of history to see that troubles come and go, and that disasters are seldom as bad as they seem. And it was that indomitability, that humour, that work ethic and that sense of history which together made her Elizabeth the Great.
A sentiment shared by another former Prime Minister who knew the Queen so well.
I am sometimes asked, among all the world leaders I met, who was the most impressive? And I have no hesitation in saying that from all the heads of state and government, the most impressive person I met was Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II.
Admiration and fond remembrance, it was all mixed in with deep grief. Former Foreign Secretary Margaret Beckett, one of the few MPs to remember the Queen's coronation, nearly overwhelmed.
She was a remarkable person, a remarkable monarch, and we are the poorer for her going.
This Prime Minister spent 10 years by her side and led the nation through the loss of Princess Diana. If Princess Diana, as you described, was the people's princess, what was Queen Elizabeth?
Queen Elizabeth was our monarch, but she was, in a sense, our matriarch, the mother of our nation. I mean, she represented that to people.
Her first Prime Minister born a century before her last, the most remarkable reign for the most remarkable of monarchs. Her wise counsel will be deeply missed. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
During the Queen's time on the throne, she welcomed more than 1.5 million people to royal palaces for garden parties. She was the patron of almost 600 charities. It had been estimated that 1/3 of the country had seen or met her in person. It's no surprise, then, that huge numbers of people have personal anecdotes of their moment meeting the Queen. Caterina Vitozzi has spoken to some of those remembering the Queen.
Far from palaces, pomp and princes, but no less part of a nation's mourning. Churches like this one in Warwick today joined in with 96 chimes marking every year of the late Queen's life. Solitary bells in small parishes felt deeply moving as millions began to reflect on the Queen's singular life.
My little girl was born just 8 weeks ago, and I feel really glad that she was born during Queen Elizabeth's reign. Sadly, she won't grow up sort of knowing her in the way I did.
I'm here because she reminded me so much of my mum. And I live part-time in Australia and part-time here in UK. So I'm privileged to be here at this moment.
Across the country today were signs of this time. A time, a transition most of us have never seen, reflected in ways we might not have expected. At Manchester Cathedral, some stopped just to be part of it, but others came out of a sense of genuine loss. Geoffrey Miller met the Queen when he was 12 and an army cadet in Wales. He's still in shock.
I couldn't believe it. You know, I just stood in the front room. I must admit there were tears coming down my eyes. She was my Queen. She was my Commander-in-Chief. She'd always been there ever since I've been alive. Everything about her was service to others.
Manchester was the last cathedral the Queen visited back in July last year. The Dean remembers her delight when he presented her with the cathedral's own honey, which they'd heard she liked in her tea.
I found her very flexible and able to relate to people at all levels. Very pleasantly, always engaging, always interested, and always with a smile on her face. Nothing was too much for her.
She has been the nation's constant. A poll carried out in 2018 found that a third of people across the UK had met or seen the Queen in person.
Over the coming days and weeks, you will see more places like this established across the country. Some big, some like this one, small, but all places for people to come together, to lay flowers, to reflect and remember a woman who they may never have met, but with whom everyone you speak to feels a deep connection, and with her passing, a deep sense of loss.
And with loss comes for some uncertainty about the monarchy's future.
It's a great loss, great loss. I just hope that Charles can live up to what his mother has obviously instilled in him. That'll be a wonderful legacy for him to carry forward.
And what a legacy. 70 years on the throne, forever in hearts. Katerina Potozzi, Sky News in Manchester.
The Queen was described by the Prime Minister today as the country's greatest diplomat. And there are perhaps few places where this talent was more powerfully deployed than in helping to achieve an end to the Troubles in Northern Ireland. Our senior Ireland correspondent, David Blevins, reports now on the reaction in Northern Ireland to her death.
On Shankill Road in Belfast, they are mourning their Queen, and the loss is palpable.
She was a wonderful woman. She really was. I don't think there'll be another monarch like her. I don't, honestly.
Here in the loyalist heartland, they're proud to call themselves British.
She was my Commander-in-Chief. She was my boss for 22 years. Best boss in the world. You'd never find a better one.
On the opposite side of the wall, there's no great outpouring of grief on the Republican Falls Road.
She's British Queen, we're Irish, but I didn't hit her or anything. Sorry for her loss and sorry for her family.
And it's everybody's to their own, but it's not something I would, you know, she was a mother, she was a grandmother, but it's just not, you know, still sad on the family.
Northern Ireland has a nationalist First Minister designate. Sinn Féin's Michelle O'Neill said this wasn't the time for anti-monarchy sentiment.
This is a time for everybody to be respectful. Queen Elizabeth has died. There's a family that is mourning her loss. At the end of the day, she may have been the Queen of England, but she was also a mother and a grandmother. And I think people should be very respectful. This is a time for reflection. This is a time to be respectful of all people and how they feel right now.
This tight security at the royal residence in Northern Ireland, it didn't stop people coming to reflect at Hillsborough Castle.
She'll be sorely missed, everybody. Doesn't matter what religion, where you're from, what colour you are. I think the millions of people around the world that's in the same state as me today.
Northern Ireland is the corner of the United Kingdom where you'll find the most loyal subjects of the Crown and the least loyal. But even in this divided society, where some are not fans of the monarchy, there is broad consensus that Queen Elizabeth herself personally made an enormous contribution to the search for peace. The Queen led the way on reconciliation. Her legacy challenges a new generation to make the same pledge for peace. David Blevins, Sky News in Belfast.
Well, across the country, there has been a flood of affection for the Queen, who died yesterday at the age of 96. And as Shingi Mariaki now reports, it is a grief felt across the generations.
It's been the first time, and it was just, I can't describe it really, I suppose, a fantasy really, the way the gold coach went by.
A moment of pomp and ceremony from another time, one that signalled the start of the Second Elizabethan era. 7 decades later, Barry remembers that day. He watched a procession pass by as a 10-year-old schoolboy.
There was so much noise going on and, just waiting for her to come by. And it was, when she came by, the big cheers and roars and people waving flags. And it was just wonderful. I'm still very sad, quite honestly. I really am. Every time I get a spare moment, I think about her. And her family, of course. I don't know. It's going to be a hard act to follow. It really is.
The Queen was patron of England's National Bowls Association. And here at this club in South London, her loss feels personal for many of the members who are in their 80s.
I think some countries have got a government and they've got a president, but they haven't got what we've got. We haven't got someone that everybody admires, more or less, and other countries admire.
At this nearby school, students several decades younger are mourning someone they've also known as a constant. The Queen visited 4 times. Pictures of her here over the years capture her longevity and the awe she inspired in onlookers.
We're thankful for her leadership.
As I've been a cadet for many years, I've been honouring her, I've been serving her, and it just feels weird that she's gone. I like to look up to her as part of the military, as a patron of our school, but also just as a woman.
It's so soon, so my thoughts are definitely still with grieving the passing of the Queen, but there is a level of excitement to a new monarch, a new era.
As Britain moves into a new moment in its history, one thing will unite the young and the old: a sense of hope for the future. Shinki Mariake, Sky News, Croydon in South London.
Well, as we've been hearing earlier this evening, King Charles addressed the nation for the first time. In a few minutes, we'll be speaking to someone who worked closely with him when he was Prince of Wales. But first, let's listen again to that address in full.
I speak to you today with feelings of profound sorrow. Throughout her life, Her Majesty the Queen, my beloved mother, was an inspiration, an example to me and to all my family. And we owe her the most heartfelt debt any family could owe to their mother, for her love, affection, guidance, understanding, and example. Queen Elizabeth was a life well lived, a promise with destiny kept, and she is mourned most deeply in her passing. That promise of lifelong service I renew to you all today. Alongside the personal grief that all my family are feeling, we also share with so many of you in the United Kingdom, in all the countries where the Queen was head of state, in the Commonwealth and across the world, a deep sense of gratitude for the more than 70 years in which my mother, as Queen, served the people of so many nations. In 1947, on her 21st birthday, she pledged in a broadcast from Cape Town to the Commonwealth to devote her life, whether it be short or long, to the service of her peoples. That was more than a promise. It was a profound personal commitment which defined her whole life. She made sacrifices for duty. Her dedication and devotion as sovereign never wavered through times of change and progress, through times of joy and celebration, and through times of sadness and loss. In her life of service, we saw that abiding love of tradition, together with that fearless embrace of progress, which makes us great as nations. The affection, admiration, and respect she inspired became the hallmark of her reign. And as every member of my family can testify, she combined these qualities with warmth, humor, and an unerring ability always to see the best in people. I pay tribute to my mother's memory, and I honor her life of service. I know that her death brings great sadness to so many of you, and I share that sense of loss beyond measure with you all. When the Queen came to the throne, Britain and the world were still coping with the privations and aftermath of the Second World War, and still living by the conventions of earlier times. In the course of the last 70 years, we have seen our society become one of many cultures and many faiths. The institutions of the state have changed in turn. But through all changes and challenges, our nation and the wider family of realms, of whose talents, traditions, and achievements I am so inexpressibly proud, have prospered and flourished. Our values have remained and must remain constant. The role and the duties of monarchy also remain, as does the sovereign's particular relationship and responsibility towards the Church of England, the church in which my own faith is so deeply rooted. In that faith and the values it inspires, I have been brought up to cherish a sense of duty to others and to hold in the greatest respect the precious traditions, freedoms, and responsibilities of our unique history and our system of parliamentary government. As the Queen herself did with such unswerving devotion, I too now solemnly pledge myself, throughout the remaining time God grants me, to uphold the constitutional principles at the heart of our nation. And wherever you may live in the United Kingdom, or in the realms and territories across the world, and whatever may be your background or beliefs, I shall endeavor to serve you with loyalty, respect, and love, as I have throughout my life. My life will, of course, change as I take up my new responsibilities. It will no longer be possible for me to give so much of my time and energies to the charities and issues for which I care so deeply. But I know this important work will go on in the trusted hands of others. This is also a time of change for my family. I count on the loving help of my darling wife, Camilla. In recognition of her own loyal public service since our marriage 17 years ago, she becomes my Queen Consort. I know she will bring to the demands of her new role the steadfast devotion to duty on which I have come to rely so much. As my heir, William now assumes the Scottish titles which have meant so much to me. He succeeds me as Duke of Cornwall and takes on the responsibilities for the Duchy of Cornwall, which I have undertaken for more than 5 decades. Today, I am proud to create him Prince of Wales, Tywysog Cymru, the country whose title I've been so greatly privileged to bear during so much of my life and duty. With Catherine beside him, our new Prince and Princess of Wales will, I know, continue to inspire and lead our national conversations, helping to bring the marginal to the centre ground, where vital help can be given. I want also to express my love for Harry and Meghan as they continue to build their lives overseas. In a little over a week's time, we will come together as a nation, as a Commonwealth, and indeed a global community, to lay my beloved mother to rest. In our sorrow, let us remember and draw strength from the light of her example. On behalf of all my family, I can only offer the most sincere and heartfelt thanks for your condolences and support. They mean more to me than I can ever possibly express. And to my darling Mama, as you begin your last great journey to join my dear late Papa, I want simply to say this: thank you. Thank you for your love and devotion to our family and to the family of nations you have served so diligently all these years. May flights of angels sing thee to thy rest.
Joining me now is Patrick Harrison, who was press secretary to then Prince Charles for more than a decade.
Good evening, Trevor.
Good evening, Patrick. This address was very personal. We heard the words, my dear Mama, my dear Papa. He talked about love and devotion. Was this a new step for the King?
I felt it was an incredibly heartfelt address and a very personal one. As I sat there watching it earlier this evening and again just now, I felt it was the man that I worked with for over a decade talking directly to me. I have no doubt it was the most personal speech that he's ever written, and he would have written that. And it touched upon all the points that I felt needed to be included in that speech, balancing the personal tribute to his darling Mama and to other family members, and then, of course, also reaffirming his commitment to public duty.
In some sense, Patrick, he has been preparing for this moment for 70 years. I noticed the phrase, "my life will change." That's a remarkable thing for a man in his, now 74th year to have to say, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And of course, it will change because he is now our king. But he has also given 50 years already of public service. And we should remember, as we think about him stepping up into this new role, that he has been carrying out quite a lot of the Queen's role over the last few years. So obviously things like investitures for many years. But we saw him at the state opening of Parliament recently, and of course at the Commonwealth Heads of Government in Rwanda. So there's quite a lot of the role that he has already done. And then there'll be many things that, of course, are new. For example, the audience with the Prime Minister, which we saw for the first time today.
So if there was a big, if you like, announcement here, it was a confirmation that Prince William will become Prince of Wales and the Duchess of Cambridge will become Princess of Wales. And he made it quite clear that he no longer expects to be able to spend the kind of time and attention that he is used to, as you've just pointed out, on his charitable endeavours and working with communities and so on. Will that be a big shift for him, psychologically and organisationally, and also for those who've worked with him during that time?
Well, obviously it is a big shift. I mean, he's an incredibly passionate individual who doesn't just see a problem but wants to fix it. And of course, he was the man who took his naval severance pay back in 1976 and set up the Prince's Trust when everybody told him he shouldn't do it. But this has been in the planning for many years. We've always known that this terribly sad day would arrive, and just a few years ago his charities were reorganised so that they could stand more on their own feet, if you like, as he moves into this new role.
But for many people, the big question that arises out of all of that is that this is a man who has never been too shy to let us know what he thinks about the great issues of the day. Whether you agree with him or not, you couldn't mistake what he believed. Of course, he's now, I think, implying in this that he is now in this new situation. Do you believe that that is going to be possible for him to resist the temptation to do what he thinks, obviously, is right, and to let everybody know that?
Yes, I do. And he said so himself in a documentary only a few years ago. I think it was 2018. I think he said something like, I'm not stupid. I do understand the difference between being Prince of Wales and being monarch. So absolutely, I do. And as I say, we've already seen plenty of examples of him stepping into the late Queen's role. And I have no doubt that that's now his focus. And we should also remember that his immediate role is to lead the nation in mourning and in grieving for a queen who was our constant light for generations. All of us, every single one of us, woke up this morning for the very first time without the Queen in our lives. And so his immediate role is to help us all, not only in the United Kingdom, but in the realms and the territories and the Commonwealth, come to terms with that. And I don't know about you, but I've had various moments during the day, sort of waves of sort of different emotions as we've gone through the day. Somebody mentioned Christmas to me a few hours ago, and I thought, gosh, yes, it won't be the Queen's speech this Christmas. So there's an immediate role for him there in taking us through these first 10 days and beyond the funeral. And as a compassionate and empathetic man, he will do that brilliantly.
Just very quickly, Patrick, one of the things that struck me rather forcibly is that the Queen, in some of her last speeches, spoke movingly about her faith. And I think we heard more about the new King's faith tonight than we have done in the past.
Well, obviously, talking about the importance of faith was an important part of this speech. But I think we've heard that many times in the past. And of course, the Prince, when he was Prince of Wales and is now King, a regular churchgoer, a very spiritual person, and someone who has been very keen to increase interfaith dialogue. I remember doing many engagements with him in the decade that I worked for him on that particular theme.
Patrick Harrison, former press secretary to then Prince Charles, thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
The address from the new King was infused with hope for the future. But for those who gathered here and millions across the country, the focus of their attention today was on the past and the Queen's life of service and devotion to her duties. Our royal correspondent, Rhiannon Mills, reports.
A symbol of celebration throughout her reign, now bringing solemnity. Gun salutes echoing across the country from Edinburgh to London, marking the end of an extraordinary life. Flags everywhere were lowered. Bells tolled up and down the country, mourning the death of the Queen. The usual business of Parliament has stopped, and ahead of speeches, MPs reflected in silence.
Her late Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, was one of the greatest leaders the world has ever known. She was the rock on which modern Britain was built. The United Kingdom is the great country it is today because of her. The Commonwealth is the family of nations it is today because of her.
The Prime Minister's first audience with the King happening in the same week his mother appointed her. On mourning her death, we have looked back, remembering a glamorous young queen who would become for so many the nation's grandmother. And so something very special has gone. People joining a collective sense of loss. Hundreds queuing in the hope of getting a seat at a special ceremony at St Paul's.
Just a most inspirational, positive, wonderful woman with a sense of humour, a sense of loyalty to her people and her family, and one of the best mothers any country can ever have.
I will certainly never know another female monarch, and she probably won't either. And that was a strange thing to think about, especially being a little girl. You know, she was such a, a strong constant for all of these years. And, and that's gone, and that's sad, whether you support the monarchy or not.
In a place of sanctuary where only months ago her family and friends had remembered her remarkable service and celebrated her Platinum Jubilee, the congregation were encouraged to look to her example.
As we mourn her loss, give thanks for her life, and reorientate ourselves as individuals and a nation to life without Her Majesty, may her words remind us of the power and strength to be found in coming together.
Much about the coming days has been scripted and planned, but it is the public response to this moment that will mark its place in history. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News, at Buckingham Palace.
Our correspondent Laura Bundock is with me now. Laura, it must have been incredibly daunting for the new king. What struck you most about his address tonight?
Well, I think you're right. This is a speech that mattered. It needed to say a lot, and I think it definitely did. We have a king speaking for the first time to people as monarch, and we also have a son speaking, paying tribute to a mother, my darling mama, as he put it. And I think you could tell there was a sense of nervousness there, that this was the most important speech he'll ever make in his life. A real choking with emotion. It was moving, it felt personal. And of course the tributes to the Queen, to her sense of duty, to her devotion to the role, and then a glimpse into what the new reign will look like. We now have a new Prince of Wales. We have a Princess of Wales. I think there was a very touching tribute to his Queen Consort Camilla, and touching words to Meghan and Harry as well there. But I think most of all, this sense of change. Here we have a man who is now having to move from a political prince, a prince who spoke out on issues close to his heart, to now having to become the man who will be a meaningful monarch, and a man who has to figure out what it is his people here in the Commonwealth want and what they need from him as monarch. So it's hardly surprising when we heard him say to Liz Truss that it was a day he'd been dreading, because clearly he knows he has to keep going, and that he also knows his reign will not be the 7 decades of his mother. So he needs to decide how he will make it matter, how he will make it meaningful. What is it that will define his reign?
Laura, thank you so much. Now, to you, she was your queen. To us, she was the Queen. The words today spoken in English of French President Emmanuel Macron, echoing the sentiment of leaders across the world as they paid tributes to the Queen. Her Majesty undertook 266 official overseas visits in total, including 100 state visits, and she played host to some of the world's most famous leaders, from Charles de Gaulle to Nelson Mandela. Our Europe correspondent, Adam Parsons, reports from Paris on the tributes from around the world.
Here's how the world paid tribute. The Sydney Opera House, a dazzling portrait. In Rio, Christ the Redeemer lit up. In New York, the Empire State Building. But in Paris, the glitters of the Eiffel Tower were turned off, the world a little darker. President Macron came to the British Embassy to sign a book of condolence. He spoke of the Queen as a close friend of France.
To you, she was your Queen. To us, she was the Queen. To us all, she would be with us forever.
Outside the embassy, flowers were being laid, and among those we spoke to, sadness and respect.
I'm sad, yes, because she's the only queen I knew in my lifetime.
She had her duty as prime concern, and in a democracy where you have five-year term, it's something that's really striking.
The Queen visited France 13 times, more than any other country. Here in France, there really is a cocktail of sympathy and affection, and it is replicated all over the world. The truth is that politicians may come and go, but the Queen was something unique in global public life. She spent 7 decades representing Britain all over the world. America has lowered its flags to half-mast. President Biden saying the Queen had defined an era. And north of the border, an emotional tribute from Canada's leader.
Canada is in mourning. She was one of my favorite people in the world, and I will miss her so.
In death, confirmation of the Queen's extraordinary fame. Messages from across the whole world, from the Pope, from China, the United Nations, even from Vladimir Putin. And in New Zealand, that most profound of honours, a haka to remember the Queen. In an era of quick celebrity, the world has remembered a public figure who endured for so very long. Adam Parsons, Sky News, Paris.
We can speak now to Rose Hudson-Wilkin, the Bishop of Dover, who served as chaplain to the Queen for more than a decade. Good evening, Bishop Rose. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, hello.
We heard from the King tonight quite a lot about his faith and a solemn pledge. To what extent do you think this is part of what we're going to see over the next period of mourning and into his reign? How important do you think this issue of faith is going to be to him?
Well, you know, I believe very strongly that faith was a bedrock of Her Majesty the Queen, and it is clearly something that she has shared with her family. I have no reason to doubt our new king when he says that this is important to him. And something that is important to one isn't just something we look at occasionally and then put it away. It is something that we live by.
We've heard a lot of her words in the last 24, 36 hours. One of her speeches struck me rather as rather significant in this respect. She spoke about her own faith, Anglican faith, but she said that the point about that for her as Queen was that her faith was an expression of the place of faith, all kinds of faith, and indeed, she said, people who don't have faith, in society. To what extent do you think she was important in establishing that idea, that faith has a legitimate and important part to play in a modern society?
Very important. You see, what we've seen in our culture is a sense that, oh, we've grown up. We don't need that thing called faith. What's that? You know, it's not scientific, so we don't need it. And what she has certainly proved in her own life is that this has been a bedrock for her. But also there is something else. When you are confident about your faith, it makes you look outwards. It makes you create space and enable others to also feel that they too can talk about their own faith and can profess their own faith. So it really is important that we understand that having one's faith and having confidence in that faith is not something that prevents others, but actually enables others too to say who they are as people of faith.
Constitutionally, the sovereign, now King Charles, is a defender of the faith, by which is meant the established church, the Anglican Church. Some years ago, there was some public debate about whether he might be named defender of the faiths, plural, as a reflection of our more diverse, multicultural society in which significant numbers of people are Muslims, they are Buddhists, there are people who have a different kind of faith, perhaps not recognisably part of an organised tradition. Do we expect to see any of that between now and his coronation?
I believe that what we will see is someone who will define for himself, without the press or others telling him what is the appropriate way to go. He will define for himself what that means and how he will practice that. But as we've already heard and seen, and we also saw that in Her Majesty the Queen, that they enabled others of other faith, recognizing we are here, we are living in a society where we are multi-religious. And so we're saying, don't go in a box with your faith. Let's all be able to express our faith.
I know that you spend a lot of time with Her Majesty and you knew her personally. One of the interesting things that I think some people are beginning to talk about is the extent to which essentially the country seems to feel that this has been a shock. Everybody's been prepared for it, but perhaps not ready. Do you think that what do you think has essentially unleashed that well of affection, concern, that sense of shock?
Oh, can I just say that I'm sure that there are lots more people who have spent much more time with her than I have. But coming back to this point, here is someone who has been a constant in our lives. We wake up, she's been there. You know, people who are grandmothers have known of her, and she's been there constantly. And she has been not only there physically, but very present in the way that she has lived, in the way she has brought communities together. And I think that the mourning we're seeing now is real because people recognize, perhaps for the first time, that maybe we've taken this for granted, and also that we will not have that from her. And so there is sadness.
Bishop Rose, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Before we go, we have a special additional episode of the Sky News Daily with Neil Patterson available now, which follows the stories of those who today travelled to Buckingham Palace. You can listen to it by scanning the QR code on screen right now or by subscribing for free wherever you get your podcasts from. That's all for us from this special programme. Coming up next is News at 10 with Dermot Moynihan, with all of today's developments. Good night.